Well, good evening, everyone. We're here today for our public hearing to consider the proposed text amendment RM1A. And I believe, Todd, you will give us an overview of what RM1A is, and then we'll open it up for questions from City Council and then open it to the public.
Well, good evening, Council. I will try to bring you up to speed on this. If you will recall that RM1A originated, I think, 4 months ago when an applicant was looking at the Victory Drive proposal, and we were looking at different options and zoning designations that might allow that type of development to occur. And it was brought to the Planning Commission, who reviewed it, and they chose not to act on it at that time. And they felt like that because we were still in the middle, on the front end of some of the Clemson Next work, that they wanted to see how some of that was going to shake out before they made a recommendation. And then flash forward that as the Victory Drive project tried other iterations that didn't work, the council asked the Planning Commission to go ahead and pick this up and review it. And they did, and at their meeting in June, that they had a unanimous vote to advance this in the form that you have before you. When they reviewed it that night, that a lot of the discussion was about the pros and cons, unintended consequences, and that the substantive outcome of that conversation was that the Planning Commission struck as a use patio homes and zero lot line homes from this zoning designation. They did, however, take advantage of the opportunity that when this was presented originally several months ago, staff and members of council and others felt like that there were opportunities to strengthen our patio home development ordinance. There was language we felt like was not there that needed to be there. A lot of it focusing on making sure that all walls had windows, that we couldn't have the same thing side by side, those kinds of things, no vinyl brick, certain basic architectural standards. So those standards were in the original version that was brought to them months ago. And even though they eliminated or recommended the elimination of patio homes and zero lot lines in RM1A, they felt like these were good standards for the other districts that did allow patio homes. So that's why you see language related to patio homes in here. Furthermore, I know it's caused some confusion that if you at the beginning of our section 3 of our zoning ordinance, where we define the different residential districts, we wrote a definition of RM1A. And as it was originally intended, it was intended to include patio homes and zero lot lines. And that language was not addressed by the Planning Commission. I think that was simply an oversight that night they were focusing on the substance of the ordinance, not this definition. And that I think they would agree, and that if, depending upon how council advances this, if in fact that you all accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and remove zero lot line and patio homes, that staff would be happy to present you all with a definition that's more reflective of what this zoning designation is. The vote that night was unanimously in support of. It was 5-0. There were 2 members who were not present or able to participate remotely. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from council?
In effect, and I asked you this on the phone earlier, since with duplexes being taken out, should we, if we consider this and we move it forward, shouldn't we call this R7.5 because there's no multifamily component in this?
That's what I was thinking. It says 7,000 feet, 7,000 feet for the lot. So why wouldn't we just call it R7?
Is it 7,000 or 7,500?
It's 7,000.
Okay, like our R7 is in effect, it's created an R7 zoning with some more stringent design guidelines.
Well,
It's in effect what it looks like now.
That is correct, and that I would agree that you know, if you think about it, as I mentioned to you earlier, Bob, that this kind of started at RM4, was moving towards the middle, and that's how it got to the RM1A. The end result before you tonight really looks like it went from R20 moving towards the middle, and so the R7, especially taking out duplex, patio home, and zero lot lines, that might be more appropriate designation. And that, and again, to be clear, or try to be clear, that the standards for the patio homes would not be applicable to RM7, let's say, or R7,
R7.
because they don't allow patio homes.
Okay.
But we do still allow patio homes in RM1, 2, 3, and 4, and those standards, in staff's opinion, we've made those patio home standards better by advancing what the planning commission put before you. But they're separate things. So the
There's two separate
R7, yeah, R7 does not have patio homes, but that doesn't mean that tonight or when the time comes that y'all couldn't advance these standards where they do allow
Okay.
patio homes.
If we did the R7, I don't know whether the R12 designates the number of houses per acre, does it?
Well, it's not per acre. What happens is it designates the minimum lot size, and the R12 is 12,000
Right,
square foot. And so how many you can get per acre is largely a matter of how you can subdivide the property, because we also have a frontage requirement.
Right, yeah.
And then you also have to front the street to do that, and then setbacks. So it's a little harder to say a per acre. I mean, technically, you could get almost 4 per acre.
Yeah,
because-
Let's-
yeah, it would have
and
to
a
be
road
a-
on both sides of the acre.
just the right size kind of configured lot, you know, a rectangle abutting a street. But that's how the R7 would go, because it's still got a lot width defined, 60 feet wide, and then it's got the same setbacks that, it's a little bit less of a side setback and a little bit less of a rear setback, because your building envelope is shrinking, and that the objection,
What's the side setback?
8 versus 10.
Okay.
Well, would Vickery, if we'd had an R7, would Vickery have gone forward?
Say that again, please.
If we'd have had an R7, would Vickery have gone forward?
No, because they were more in the 5,000 and 6,000 square foot range.
But this may have been an option that because they were kind of in a squeezed point between R12. I think they had some thought that, hey, maybe we could make R12 work. It's not going to be exactly what we want. That an R7 may have been better if it was.
But they wanted patio homes, did they also?
No.
Well,
Can we not pull out the dead horse again?
Yeah.
Can we not beat that dead horse again?
I'm just curious.
Can we not do that? My question is, but this is straight residential, so this doesn't have anything to do with preserving more green space or any of the other things that we've talked about putting in the PDs of having, like the trails or the walking trails or anything else. This is just straight residential code. This is it right here.
well, there are no
I'm
covenants.
sorry, I might not be being clear.
Yeah, but the code here is that what this would do is create a zoning designation that's currently titled RM1A. We know the name is up for debate. And that should it pass in the form that is written, that all that RM1A would allow is single-family homes. And that there are no architectural standards, there are no other open space standards, just like there are not for R12 or R20. That we don't have any of those standards unless you do a subdivision. I know this is a little complicated, to where if somebody took 10 acres, 15 acres and wanted to rezone it RM1A, and then subdivide that property into multiple 7,000 square foot lots, that our land development regulations have requirements that would, make them have a 25% canopy coverage, a 30% open space, 4% of which has to be common open space like an amenity or something like that. And that depending on what it abuts, there could be buffer requirements. And so those standards exist, whether it's R20, R12, RM1A, they already exist.
But only if I put in a subdivision.
Correct. If you had a...
I'm trying to get to Mr. McGuire's usual worst-case scenario here, because I start to worry.
Well, what happens is it depends. We have simple, minor, and major subdivisions. And a simple subdivision is if you have a lot that you want to divide in half. That's done at the staff level. We post it, and as long as nobody objects, then we do it at the staff level. If somebody objects, we bring it to the planning commission and say, y'all decide. Major subdivision is when you get over 5 lots, or five or more lots, and that at that point, the standards I just cited kick in.
Okay.
And so any kind of significant, what most of us think of as a subdivision, which is a neighborhood, technically in the planning world, a subdivision is taking any lot and creating more than existed. That can be...
I just worry, I go back to our usual example of the little mushrooms that are across from Ingalls.
Right. And part of the, that was part of the motivation for this language. As you go deeper into it, the language that outlines the new standards for a patio home would disallow anything like that ever occurring in the city limits.
That's what I thought I was reading that. I'm just making sure.
Yeah. Historically, the city has been fairly hesitant in trying to tell individuals what you're going to do on your half-acre lot, what your house has to look like, what materials you can use, what color it can be. If your neighborhood wants to have those covenants, if the planned development you're in has it, that's fine, but the city, by and large, has stayed out of that business of telling you what you can do. It's only when you start getting into more dense, like patio home developments, that the community felt like this is something where we could have a whole lot of something we don't want, and what are ways we can protect ourselves. And I think we had some standards. I think they were good ones. I think these make it even better.
Like I said, I thought that's what I was reading. I'm just, that Ingalls thing, whatever those are.
But that doesn't apply to the straight R7.
Correct.
Those standards do not, only if there was a patio home, and that's 2 different things that we're talking about.
And you could not have patio homes in R7.
So basically, you couldn't have a patio home in R7, but you could have, just like you could in R12 or R20, you could have a pretty value engineered house.
Correct.
Right.
Value engineered, that's a nice phrase.
So, and the concern has always been with R6, one of the big concerns is, does that get to the price point that would be attractive for those homes to become student rentals within those neighborhoods? So I think that's something that we need to think about, because R7 isn't super significantly different than R6. That maybe some design standards might be appropriate to address that if we would decide to move forward.
But it would also set up for workforce housing,
Yeah.
better for workforce housing.
It would, yeah.
So
If we could find a mechanism to control that in some way, or to ensure that those houses would actually be available for workforce, working adults, affordable, X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be, that's a trick that we've got to.
I don't think it's a trick. I think it's relatively...
Mary tricks, that's what I'm talking about.
I think it's relatively easy to accomplish if you wanted to, cross that line and start and say that even though these are single-family homes, that we are going to establish some core standards. And maybe core standards if you're building more than 5 homes or something like that. And because at that point, they're already going to have to go through a review process with the planning commission, because they approve the subdivisions. And that up to this point, that the subdivision standards are not included in the land development regulations. They reside in the zoning ordinance, and that they are conditional uses. And so they're applied at the staff level, that the items that we're talking about here, about windows on every facade and no vinyl solid brick, and that no two house patterns side by side, and you can't simply paint them a different color and say they're different. So things to help create some sort of rhythm and charm to this type of development. Because we've all seen situations in our town where they are the same side by side, and that with a little bit of effort, they could have been more durable. And by that I mean we don't know 10 years from now who may be living there. Most of these were built for student housing, with students in mind. A lot of them would be easily adapted to a family, and that, but they feel like a student housing compound, and that some of the standards we're talking about here would lend itself to making it more human and less student housing oriented. So those standards are here. The question that Bob brought up is, as we move forward, is there a way to apply some of those standards to R7 or RM1A? And again, I think there is a way to do it. It does, we'd want to be cautious as we look at the language to where we're not getting, in my opinion, too intrusive with what color is your house. You can paint your colors, your shutters that color, that kind of thing, that it could turn into a logistical issue with staff trying to be the arbiter of these things. It's also a little slippery to predetermine what those color ranges are. You don't want the BAR to have to go through every house review. And so some general standards, I think, could be applied. In fact, we could borrow heavily from the standards that you have before you tonight.
Fran has a question, then I want to make sure I open it up to see if there are any calls for the public.
Okay, so, and this always sort of, I don't understand this. So given the purpose of this new zoning, what I think is the purpose, why do we still have conditional or special exceptions that would allow bed and breakfasts, other kinds of places in here? Why do we even allow the possibility that if we know that the preference for this is maybe affordable housing, workforce housing, why do we include, and these are, I understand conditional and special exception, but I believe I saw bed and breakfast was one. There were some other, I mean, why not just leave those out so we know that this can't be a petition to use it other than what we really want it to be?
That would be a decision, a question best put to the Planning Commission, because they're the ones who advanced this and chose to include that. That was in the draft that we presented to them, that we carried forward the same standards that were in RM1, only we deleted duplexes. That was the initial ordinance.
Why do
And
we,
that,
just generally, I mean, I'm just curious, actually, generally, why do we have exceptions and conditions that...
in my personal opinion, Fran, which is all I can speak to, because again, I know that there'll be members of the Planning Commission here later for the next issue, but to allow for a group home, and to allow for care of the elderly, to allow for a management office for a patio home development, to allow for a nursing care center, to allow for a kindergarten, a church, public safety facilities, adult care services, group home for adults, bed and breakfast, child care services, and freestanding parking structures. That those are all, well, one of the reasons is so of those things that you can make your own determination which ones you think we would not want to include, and council certainly has a right to alter this and add, delete, whatever you see fit.
Yeah, I guess in this case, it just seemed, and Elaine is here actually, but this seemed like such a targeted category, zoning category, that there was pretty specific reasons to do this. And I'm reading from the cover sheet of tonight's document, for instance, that those things seem to not be within that target. And so does, all those things you read can be other places, I realize that, or many other places, but I guess I'm just concerned that if we really are thinking of this as a specific kind of zoning area, what's going to be built here, why would we want to include opportunity for exceptions that don't match that target?
I guess, Fran, that you know, in thinking about it, is that, you know, to limit yourself prematurely. The majority of the things I read are about societal needs, schools, elderly care, child care, nursing care, and that the demand for that is present, and what the projected needs are a little slippery, it's hard to predict. But given the fact that a lot of our traditional neighborhoods are 20 and 12, where these are also allowed, and are historically resistant to the introduction of such features into their neighborhoods, not exclusively, but in my experience here, that it's been difficult to get that done, or at least without a lot of resistance. That the Board of Zoning Appeals has approved group homes and nursing care homes, but it was definitely over the protest of the neighborhood who said, we don't want these things in our neighborhood. And so by including them in an ordinance like this, that it simply gives the city, it doesn't block out an opportunity to find a place where they may be appropriate and a neighborhood may want them or allow them. And so to me, it keeps your options open. It doesn't require you to put them in there.
So did the Planning Commission specifically ask for those special exceptions in conditional use, or was that just because that's what the other zoning?
It's just matching it up with the other
Yeah.
residential zoning.
Because it's, everything else is that way. I mean, if you were going to do that, it seems to me you'd want to review the entire deal. I mean, and maybe have special designations outside of that. So I'll give you the Catholic Church, just use that as an example. That was an R20 neighborhood, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was RM3 and R20. It was a mix.
Yeah. So but essentially, in both of those were conditional uses right here. I mean, so.
Wasn't
No,
Catholic
it's a
Church
PD.
No, I
a
mean-
PD? Catholic Church is a PD.
Catholic Church.
Yeah, it's now a planned development. It was done as a PD. They did not request rezoning. They
Okay.
they request rezoning through a PD.
But either way, it was a conditional, if you look at this, religious organizations, et cetera, it could have been done.
That could have been done if it was all R20, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or actually it falls under all of them, honestly. So for example, on Cambridge, you got that facility there behind the grocery store. Is that in Clemson? It is in Clemson, right?
That's in Clemson.
So that was, I don't know what that was before, but that was essentially another conditional use here.
Correct.
So
I
to
think
speak.
that was a special exception, in that because like the religious, like a church, the only where it's a conditional use is RM 3.5, which is a conservation district, which has specific standards. If it was anywhere else in the city, a church requires a vote by the Board of Zoning Appeals. It's not approved at the staff level. It goes through a public vetting process to where they can appeal to the public and to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Is this right for this location? And that's the the difference between a special exception and conditional use is that it requires a vote and by an independent body to weigh the pros and cons.
So that's for the special exception.
Correct.
And who has to approve the conditional use? That doesn't come to us.
That's approved at the staff level.
So conditional use is not.
Correct.
I don't know, I think that's just something else to think about. I'd be interested why the planning commission thought like they did. And I only say that because, it's pretty specific in here that permits that the point behind this, as I read this, really is single-family residences. And then those things, I think, change that dynamic, even if they happen rarely. And Todd, I don't know, maybe you can know how often this is actually to be used, the RM1A, but
That was my question.
okay, so you can get back to that, but I guess I was just concerned that if we would be setting aside land for reason A, and there's a process that reason B, and those are all great reasons. I'm not anti-church, even anti-parking structures, not anti-bed and breakfast, but you remember, right, when we had the bed and breakfast, brouhaha about the one on Issaquah Trail. And I guess that's just my concern. Maybe at some point the planning commission can tell us why those things, as opposed to other than the uniform standard, we've always done it. But anyway, that was my only question. Why were we doing something that may not match up with what we really do?
No, I know Elaine is here, and I didn't know if she would have any insight on the rationale behind that. And if not,
She's playing on Facebook.
if not, we can see if there are any calls from the public. No calls from the public. So we have two members. Any from our public? I want to make sure we get all the questions.
Well, we're gonna leave this RM1A, or we're gonna call it R7?
There'd be a
We're
different.
not doing anything right now.
We're not doing it.
We're just taking
Okay,
comments.
so he's gotta bring something back.
Yeah, we're just taking comments right now.
Okay.
We can decide to move forward or not later.
Gentleman has a question, comment. Thank you, Todd. And where's the sign-in sheet, Deborah?
Right here.
Okay.
That's just a plain passing that supplies.
John Crowley, live at 111 Gregory Street. I actually think R7 is a good thing that the city could have. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to start being applied everywhere or whatever. You're still going to have your 2 acres to even petition to get rezoned. I spoke to Fran earlier about a couple of things you guys have already addressed, but the R7, I agree with changing it just to make it a little more, especially if you're taking out the patio homes and things. As far as the conditional uses and special exceptions, that just, it goes along with what's there. You never know what's going to come up. If you get a 15-acre development, say that you guys annex in 5 years, and you take all that out, well, now you've either got to rezone 2 acres, because that's the minimum for a new district, to something else to allow daycare, or you can have them apply for a conditional use, or they can drive to the other side of town where there's already a daycare, which may be full, because daycares are very limited with capacity. So I think that's one of the things I would kind of lean towards agreeing with having this put in for the city.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? We're at 6 o'clock.
Okay, John Crowley.
Mary, did you have anything to add? Or we-
I was just listening to the discussion of Todd and why those other things are in there. If you have a completely planned community, like with blocks and stuff, you're going to have less allowable uses because you can plan ahead, like this is going to be a good district for that, or this is a better district for parking structure. But if you have communities that just grew up with leaps and bounds from basically nothing, you're going to have, we don't have blocks, so we don't have well-defined. We have sort of areas that have grown up and been defined over time. And if you limit what you can put in those areas, you don't have the advantage of having planned beforehand. I know there's some communities in South Carolina that I think isn't there a Disney community down at the coast somewhere that they just created, and they could do whatever they wanted to with it from the get-go, and that would be a lot of fun. But y'all are faced with areas in town that have terrain or businesses or things that have grown up over time, and that's one of the challenges for zoning in terms of use by right, conditional use, and special use that you have to face. And y'all are a pay grade way above me to make those decisions. So.
I think the problem is that
None of us make as much as you do.
is that we've all learned that it would be nice, or it could be nice, or wouldn't it be great, is not how things have gone here developmentally in terms of developers. So I think that's why I always calls it, Fran's, what's the worst case scenario? Because that's where we're gonna go.
Well, I guess the next step is to bring it to council, or you gonna send it back to the planning commission and ask those questions, or will we bring it back to council at some point?
I'd like for the planning commission to think through, do we want some of those, if we're gonna call it R7, do we want some of those standards that we were thinking about with patio homes, as well to get a product or not? I'm both sides of the fence there, because again, as John pointed out, it gets, maybe it cuts down the ability to have some affordable workforce housing in that mode, but maybe have planning commission at least think about that a bit. And then do we have the planning commission, did you all kill the idea of a patio home exception that would be, or are we good with the patio home options still with this, if we have this, with the patio home options that are available in RM1, 2, 3, wherever else?
The patio homes are RM 1, 2, 3, 3.5, and 4. They're all conditional uses.
The issue was with that project is that we didn't necessarily want to see a value engineered patio home / duplex development to occur with the Vickery Drive property, which if those guys had bailed out and sold the land, you could get the lowest common denominator there, and that wouldn't necessarily be the best thing for that property if it was in RM1, 2, 3, 3.5, 4. It was the big concern there. So I'd still like planning commission to think a little bit about, I don't care about calling it RM1A or whatever, call it patio home. Patio home development, zoning, that if we had an option where that was possible that we could live with, that might be something to consider in the future.
So I've heard from Bob, do you want me, does council want me to take this back to the planning commission and ask them to review this with, I think it sounded like 3 things, consider the naming of the ordinance or the district. You didn't mention this, but I would assume you'd want to rewrite that definition up front where we talk about the patio homes, clean that up. And then to look at the applicability of some sort of standards similar to patio homes that could be applied to this new district. Did I hear correctly?
That's what I heard.
But with the message that there's 2 sides to that story of the R7 would provide maybe opportunities for workforce and more affordable housing, but that also puts it into a category that might, become student housing as well. Is there a needle to thread there where you?
In my personal opinion, that the standards are probably what we would want for any workforce housing as well. In my opinion, that they are involving percentages of open space based upon the number of properties, that no identical homes side by side. I think that there's advantages to that, and that's easily achieved without changing costs. It's just a minor thread of creativity to have more than one house plan.
At least one bathroom open to a common area.
We don't have that
Don't
area.
have that kind of thing in there.
That we have windows on all sides. I think that's a reasonable
Yeah,
request.
I just like that. Yeah,
We
they
just
could
want to
think.
make sure, yeah.
Yeah,
That's just it.
think through some of those issues.
Elaine, is that okay with you? I'm sorry, never mind.
our ordinance, patio homes are standalone residential.
Standalone.
Yeah.
They are standalone, single units, not attached. They might have, very small distance between homes, but they're single units.
The distance between the.
It's not, it is a single family. A patio home can be a single family home. Yeah. It's just that you are allowing small lot sizes with, very small setbacks, almost not, you can do zero lot, but not zero lot line.
Yeah, that, in my opinion, if you go to a patio home concept, you're gonna have smaller than 7,000 square foot lots.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just throwing.
Yeah, we already have that in RM1, 2, 3, 3.5, and 4, but they can be very, very value engineered. Was the big concern with the Vickery Drive project, is that if we did that and that project didn't happen, then what could potentially happen there could be duplexes and patio homes that were really close together, that looked exactly the same, that were, vinyl sided and down to the lowest common denominator. And with that being one of the last big opportunities to develop houses in Clemson, that might not be the most attractive thing, because that potentially would be in that price range that it becomes a student housing neighborhood. And the idea, and one of the recommendations in Clemson Next, is that to look for opportunities for more family-oriented, adult working professional development, as well as affordable workforce. And don't want to, again, that's one of the last opportunities where that can occur on any scale in town.
And if we send it back to planning commission and go through this process, we'll have to have another public hearing on the new, if it does change, we would have to have another public hearing.
That's a good question. And my guess would be no.
No.
That y'all are, at this point, we've had the public hearing. All the matters that y'all are talking about are in the ordinance, and that it's a matter of, just like if it didn't go back to the planning commission, y'all have the ability, the right to make these decisions yourself, and to say, we're going to change the name, here's going to be the new definition of what that R7 is, and we want to take these standards for patio homes and apply them here. Y'all could do that at your first reading without it going back to the planning commission. But I would need to know if that's what you want me to do, because we have, I'm trying to think about our deadlines, and I think it's next.
I don't know that this is absolutely critical, right? Like this is not like a pending emergency. So I think we got some time to think about this a bit. We have to.
Yeah, it's whatever y'all want to do. I just want to make sure I'm clear on my, what you want me to do, and that I can get this in front of the planning commission at the next meeting, and address these issues, and then we can bring it back to you as a report, or do you want it back to you as a first reading?
Let's go to public
Discussion item.
And so then we can tell you where we're at with that, and then based on that, then you can,
So Todd, one other thing I would like, actually, I've had this discussion before. In the zoning code of ordinances in section 19301, it narratively describes each residential district, so it gives a definition. But we really don't follow these, right? I mean, there's no way to do this. I'll give you an example. So RM3, it says that this is intended to offer a range of housing types from single and moderate density multifamily that serve the needs of multi-general housing market. Emphasis is given to promoting sustainable, walkable communities that respect the natural environment. RM 3.5, serve the needs of multi-generational housing with an emphasis on responsible environmental design principles. RM 4, provide alternative to lower density housing with an emphasis on walkable, environmentally responsible design principles. We don't really apply those other than what's in the actual code. So I guess my suggestion would be, this is a good opportunity to do this. I think either of those descriptions need to be accurate, and I hate to use this word, enforceable, as opposed to suggestions, or I don't know the purpose they serve. We've had this back and forth because defining environmentally sustainable is difficult, but all of those have the philosophy behind that zoning. It really does. And so I think for this one, it'd be nice to have a similar statement with the philosophy behind it, but then think about, with all of these, no rush, but at some point, what do those words really mean in terms of enforcing what happens? So is the development at the corner of, we've used this example, right, 93 in Cambridge, is that really environmentally sustainable design principle? Is that an environmentally friendly neighborhood? Todd and I decided we can't do, there's lots of definitions of that, so I have no problem. But I guess I think in this case, we really need to think a bit more. If we're going to have descriptions of these places, I think we need to make sure those descriptions mean something in terms of the design, the requirement. But now, if I understand what you're saying, we're really not bound by that. We're bound by the zoning code, the things on the graphs and the charts, which is why I asked the question about what is the purpose of this and what's going to happen. I think at some point, when I should, the planning commission or us or you go back through these things and A, figure out, does that really mean anything in terms of what can or can't be built? And B, is that really what we want these areas to be, or these archaic that no longer are relevant, multi-generational, was that still a goal? But anyway, but I think this one points out that same point, that there is a purpose behind this, a philosophy, or at least a purpose that you articulated, the document articulated, but then I think the building there has to articulate the same thing. And I don't think we have it right now, and there's something wrong with the enforcement of the tools to do that.
I'm not sure there's a question in there. But let me respond to it.
What about that? That's the question.
So what Fran is saying is we need to make sure that our descriptions and the charts below reflect things that will support that overall description.
Yeah.
That'd be a whole lot of rewriting.
Over there.
And we agree that there are a couple of things when we were looking at this. Actually, I think it was Elaine several years ago brought this up at a planning commission meeting about some questions about the definitions, not only this, but our commercial districts as well. And we amended all of our definitions for the commercial district. We were in the process, and we have descriptions, revised descriptions of all of these. And they were part of a kind of a wagon train of proposed ordinance changes that came to a stop during the moratorium and Clemson Next initiative, because changing these district designations and standards when we have no idea where they're going to change seemed like maybe not the best use of time. So but we agree with you, because we felt like they weren't consistent. They weren't consistent amongst themselves, and even in how they had been applied. More importantly, one of the things that we identified is that there are very few places in the zoning ordinance that are not enforceable, and that's by design. This is one of those areas where it's a description. It's more comp plan like wouldn't it be nice if, or these are some of the things we would like, but the language is pretty lofty, very non-specific, and even if it says that it should be the best design possible, we can only enforce the standards adopted under that district, and those are not adopted standards. So to your point, Fran, I think this needs some work, and whether or not it's eliminating them, or to Bob's point, crafting them to be less nebulous and more in keeping with what's actually happening or what we want to happen on the ground, and making sure that any language we have in there has an enforceable component when it gets into the ordinance itself. And so I think that we're on the same page, and it's something we'd like. We've got to start on that language. But before we run out of
But
time,
let me say, whatever my question was, I think you answered it.
Oh, good.
I was gonna say, I think you answered the question, and I was gonna say, we do have 15 minutes, so.
Well, the, one thing that I do want to make sure I have a good understanding as to whether or not this is something you do want me to take back to the planning commission to address these issues.
I believe that's the
Yes.
Yeah,
Then I
I
will
think
do that.
you've got it.
consensus of the group is.
Okay. And then we'll, after that, I'll work with Andy and we'll get it on the.
So, and we are at this point now? There are no calls, there are no calls. So I believe we're at the place where we can go ahead and adjourn the public hearing. Do I need to get a vote?
I move we adjourn.
Second. I'm looking at everybody. All in favor?